Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days which to revise and extend their remarks to include miscellaneous materials on the topic of the special order.
Without opposition. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we're back at it tonight, Mr. Speaker. We're going to be going at a subject that I've been down here before on, and will continue to come down here on until, frankly, I believe that we're moving forward with an issue that affects pretty much every hometown of every congressman here. It's amazing, though, how much we don't know about it. It's amazing how much it goes unreported, how much it gets looked over. And in the sake of the shiny object of savings, our community pharmacists, our independent pharmacists are being basically run out of business. Mr. Speaker, I don't tell you anything new, and for my friends who will join me here tonight, this is about hometown America. This is about the healthcare chain that we all talk about, and a forgotten element of that healthcare chain is we need to focus on, because community pharmacists fill an important niche in our healthcare system, serving as the primary healthcare provider for over 62 million Americans. They dispense roughly 40% of the prescriptions nationwide and a higher percentage in rural areas, especially mine in northeast Georgia. Community pharmacists play such an important role in our healthcare system by being that accessible voice at the other end of the phone or at the counter. Just being there sometimes to answer those just simple questions that are very important to somebody, or the difficult questions that could frankly mean the life or death for that patient. Knowing how to take their medication, knowing what to get, and how to be there and be a part of the community, not just at the pharmacy, but at the ball fields, in the communities, and employing some of the best small businesses, employees that we have in our communities are found in our community pharmacists. You know, when we look at the relationship that communities have with their pharmacies, and especially our communities pharmacists, the face-to-face counseling, the work that goes into our community pharmacists and pharmacists mainly in general, is something that is just something that we need to continue to focus on. Patients' failure to properly take medication regime costs healthcare system nearly $300 billion and contributes to 125,000 deaths each year. The face-to-face counseling that our community pharmacists give is most important and a most effective way for ensuring that our patients take the right medicine, know what they're taking and why they take it. But yet, as I've stated before, and I've stated here again on the floor tonight, there is a group that believes that our community pharmacists, really frankly, if you just look at it, shouldn't exist. Because everything they're doing, the pharmacy benefit manager, the PBM, that middle person, and I want to show you this. We're going to talk about this chart here as we go. But the PBMs control the pharmacy system right now. In fact, if you just take the PBM here in the middle and you look at employers and you look at patients and you look at pharmaceutical companies and you look at the pharmacies, they sort of circle around here. And we're going to talk about this, quote, savings issue and look at it and saying, is it actually saving employers? Is it actually helping pharmaceutical companies get out products? Is it actually, more importantly, is it actually helping the patient? And I think tonight you're going to find out that there's a lot of questions to be had here. We'll talk about that as we go forward. You know, as we look at this, we've had a lot of things that my friends tonight are here to talk about. You know, we're going to talk about MAC transparency. We're going to talk about generics. We're going to talk about the way this goes. But we're also going to talk about really what I believe is the unfair tactics used by PBMs that are constantly forcing our pharmacies and our community pharmacists out of business. I mean, I think at some point in time, many of the PBMs ought to change their mission in life into, quote, saving or being a part of the pharmaceutical system and say, our job is to run community pharmacists out of a job. They're the best I've ever seen at doing that. In one of my small towns, just 20 minutes from my house, in the past year, 3 community pharmacists have closed. 3. They're now in a smaller town being forced into choices they didn't want to have to make, into PBM-controlled pharmacies. You see, PBMs, when they first started, had a good idea. How do we make sure that we get drugs and medications to pharmacies at a cheaper price so that the patients at the end save money, employers can save money? And then they decided that they wanted to be a part of all the system. They wanted to start owning pharmacies. They wanted to start owning the supply chain. They wanted to start being a part of it all. And when they did that, then everybody else was competition. From here, I mean, the problems that we have in Georgia pharmacists and have talked about, and we've talked about as well, is when you have your competitors who are able to come in and audit you, and they're able to fine you for clerical errors, and for things, and keep you out of systems and out of payments and things that they give their own pharmacies, that's just wrong. When they only come in and audit the name brands and leave the generics behind. And for some of you, if you're watching, if you're thinking about and hearing my voice for the first time, you may be saying, well, that's okay. They're making sure the system is safe. PBMs are not auditing pharmacies to make sure they're safe. They're auditing pharmacists to make money because they're going to withhold the cost of the drug from the pharmacist. In other words, if they make a clerical error and the drug costs, let's just say $100, they don't take their profit. They don't take the margin. They take the entire $100 back. I wish I had a racket set up that good. And the sad part about that whole statement right there is, at the end of the day, Joe or Susie or Bob or Bill or whoever came and got their prescription knew nothing about this, quote, error. All they knew is the pharmacist filled the prescription that the doctor had ordered. They went home, took their medicine, and got better. But yet on this other end, PBMs are trying to destroy an industry and a group of people who mean so much to our communities. So tonight, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about some more. We're going to keep bringing this attention until the light is fully shined on this. And tonight, as we get ready to talk, a friend who's been such a friend to us as we've been doing these, Dave Losbach, as he is here tonight, he's going to talk, and we've shared this before. It's good to share this stage again with you because this is something that needs to be discussed. It needs to be handled until every member of the House and Senate understand this, and we find a workable solution. And with that, I yield as much time as the gentleman may need.
All right. Well, I want to thank my friend, Mr. Collins, for inviting me to join him in leading this special order. I've been in this job long enough to know that there are people you don't want to follow when you speak, and Doug Collins is one of those. The guy is absolutely inspired, but he is inspired for a lot of good reasons. He's been a strong leader on pharmacy issues. He's been a great partner on the bills that we'll discuss this evening. I'm proud to say this is a bipartisan issue, although at the moment I'm the only Democrat over here. I can assure you there are others who are with us on this issue.
We'll bring them on.
That's right. And look, we've been able to find a consensus on this, too, among this group of folks here, this bipartisan group. As my good friend said, pharmacists across the country serve as the first line, really, of healthcare services for many patients, especially in small towns in Iowa and around the country. People count on pharmacists' training and expertise to stay healthy and informed, and maybe most importantly, to stay out of urgent care centers and hospitals, something we all want to see happen. I'm proud to stand here today with my colleagues to recognize the quality, affordable, and personal care that pharmacists provide every day. Community pharmacists and their pharmacies are also a great source of economic growth in rural communities like those in my district in Iowa. I have 24 counties. It's a big area. And when a pharmacy is under pressure economically, the community knows it and hears about it. And if they have to close, the community suffers as a result. And as a member of the Small Business Caucus, I recognize how challenging it can be for some small pharmacists to compete with bigger companies. And I appreciate their hard work to serve our communities every day. Like most small business owners, community pharmacists face many challenges to compete and negotiate on a day-to-day basis with large entities in their business transactions. I frequently visit with community pharmacists in my district, and I've heard directly from them how hard they have to fight to compete on a level playing field that isn't always level for smaller pharmacies, so it's not really a level playing field. One pressing challenge facing many community pharmacists, as was already mentioned, is the ambiguity and the uncertainty surrounding the reimbursement of generic drugs. Of all things, the reimbursement of generic drugs. Generic prescription drugs account for the vast majority of drugs dispensed by pharmacists, making transparency and reimbursement absolutely critical to the financial health of small pharmacies. However, pharmacists are reimbursed for generic drugs through maximum allowable cost, or MAC. a price list that outlines the upper limit or the maximum amount that an insurance plan will pay for a generic drug. And these lists are created by the pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, the drug middlemen, if you will. But the methodology used to create these lists is not disclosed. Further, these lists are not updated on a regular basis, resulting in pharmacists being reimbursed below what it costs them actually to acquire the drugs. This is a major problem because when PBMs aren't keeping the cost of generic drugs consistent, those price differentials can be a serious financial burden for local pharmacies. Small pharmacy owners face even greater disadvantage than their larger counterparts because of the clear lack of leverage they have when negotiating the amount they will be reimbursed for filling prescriptions when dealing with the PBMs. When we talk about pharmacies closing because they can't keep up with the financial challenge, we're talking about the creation of an access problem also that directly affects patients. So it's not just the pharmacies themselves closing down and those folks losing their jobs. It's the patients they serve. When we talk about reimbursement uncertainty for pharmacies, we're talking about uncertainty about patients' ability to get the medications they need at an affordable price. Talk about a community pharmacist being put out of work. We're talking about taking away a familiar face that local folks trust with their health care concerns. And to address this problem, and Mr. Collins is going to talk about this and others are, I partnered with him to introduce H.R. 244, the MAC Transparency Act. And we've had actions along this line in the state of Iowa as well. We can do it at the federal level if we can do it at the state level, folks. This bipartisan bill would ensure that federal health plan reimbursements to pharmacies to keep pace with generic drug prices, which can skyrocket overnight. So specifically, and I know Mr. Collins is going to talk about this, it will do three things. It'll provide pricing updates at least once every 7 days. It will force disclosure of the sources used to update the maximum allowable costs or MAC prices. Again, it's about transparency. And it'll notify pharmacies of any changes in individual drug prices before these prices can be used as the basis for reimbursement. This is a common sense bill, folks. It is about access. It is about making sure folks have access to their pharmaceuticals, to their drugs, and generic drugs in particular. Another issue I'd like to highlight is the problem of direct and indirect remuneration, or DIR fees. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, originally coined DIR fees as a means of assessing the impact on Medicare Part D medication drugs, cost of drug rebates, and other price adjustments applied to prescription drug plans. However, DIR fees have increased greatly over the last year on pharmacies, and if the pharmacy agrees to enter into a contract with a PBM or Part D plan sponsor, it does not seem fair that these mediators can reduce the reimbursement rate since the contract has already been agreed to. This gets a little bit complicated. I know you're going to be talking about, well, there's just basically no transparency regarding how the fees are calculated. So there is another bill that I've signed on to. I applaud my colleagues, Representative Morgan Griffith, a Republican, Peter Welch, a Democrat, for introducing the Improving Transparency and Accuracy in Medicare Part D Spending Act. It would prohibit PBMs and plan sponsors who own PBMs from retroactively reducing reimbursement on claims submitted by pharmacies after the contract has been submitted. Folks, you know, this is a scam, and it shouldn't be happening. And I urge everyone, leadership, to bring this to us and everyone to vote for this bill and for our other bill. I want to thank again Mr. Collins and the other members who've been here tonight. It's a great opportunity for me to participate in highlighting some problems that our community pharmacists are facing, and then ultimately their patients, the folks they serve as well. Those are the folks we are trying to look out for as best we can and trying to serve while we're here in this Congress. Thanks very much, Mr. Collins, and I yield back. Appreciate it.
You hit it. That last little part right there was dead on. This is about the patient. This is about serving that patient who is used to that trusted face, who understands it, and also really a part of that healthcare system that's been provided along the time that is now at risk of going away. It is not too strong to say that if we do not look at this, and some say, well, this is a free market, let them go contracts. Government is one of the biggest payers of this. And this is something we've got to get out. In fact, something that brought up, as I was listening to you talk, there was a study at TRICARE, in fact. And in just a moment, I'm going to introduce Mr. Scott here, Armed Services from Georgia, a friend. But TRICARE did a study where it found that if it eliminated PBMs from the TRICARE program, it would save roughly $1.3 billion per year. We're up here arguing about problems in our budget, and we could save this much money? No, this is about profits. This is about consolidation. This is about vertical integration. This is about taking control of a market in which 3 to 4 companies control 83% of the market. We're not talking about a small little startup.
That's right.
This is what, and you're right on, dead on. Thank you so much for the work that you are doing, and I appreciate it. And in light of that, especially dealing with TRICARE and dealing with the bottom line issue here is how we cost effectively provide services to those members in our communities who need it the most. And this, issue of savings, I know there's a Texas study that also showed if they went away, they would save money as well, in the millions of dollars. It's building, but we just got to keep pointing it out. And with that, I yield time to my friend from Georgia, my longtime colleague, not only in the House in Georgia, but the House up here, and fighting for these very values that we find in Georgia and all across the country. Mr. Austin Scott, I give you as much time as you would like to take.
Well, Mr. Collins, I want to thank you and I want to thank my colleague from Iowa. This is a bipartisan issue. And before I speak on behalf of the community pharmacists, I want to just take a second and speak on behalf of the taxpayers, the hardworking men and women in this country. Free markets are transparent markets. And if we had transparency in this system, we probably wouldn't be here today because the American public wouldn't stand for what's going on. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any news reports or any reporting to inform the public of all of the things that have happened over the last couple of years. But we saw it on the EpiPen just a couple of weeks ago, and you saw what happens when the press reports, the public finds out what's going on, pressure is put on, and then a response comes. A response that would have been what we would call equitable for the patients that need the treatment, but at least a response came. It's not just EpiPens, though. It's not just multi-$100 drugs and multi-$1,000 drugs. When we talk about drugs as simple as nitroglycerin tablets, and again, you as the taxpayer are the largest purchaser of this through the government. Nitroglycerin tablets have gone from 5 cents a piece to $5 a piece. Doxycycline tablets, an antibiotic that's been on the market for many, many years, again, another generic drug, it's gone from pennies a piece to dollars a piece. I know my colleague Buddy Carter could probably name more drugs for you than I can, where we've seen those same type of 100-fold increases in the price of drugs. And I can tell you that you as the hardworking taxpayers of this country, in the end, pay that bill. And so one of the best things that we can do for you is to make sure that we are trying to shed light on and bring transparency to this system, and to make sure that we are keeping that small business owner in business so that we're able to get the information that we need to do a better job for you from them. And that's where our nation's community pharmacists come in. I know for me, I walk into my local pharmacist and they can tell me right offhand, what the most egregious price increases were of the past week. And they're happening every single week, ladies and gentlemen. These independent businesses, they operate in underserved or rural areas like many of the counties that I represent in Georgia's 8th District. Access to care is already an issue in these areas, and it'd certainly be much worse if our community pharmacies didn't exist. These areas, doctors are many miles away. Local pharmacists deliver the flu shots. They give advice on everything from over-the-counter drugs to drug interdictions. And if you've got a sick child, most of them will meet you at the store after hours to help your child get the medication that they need. Try that with somebody who's not a small business owner. It's crucial that these pharmacies have a level playing field to stay in business against the large-scale competitors. And the middlemen, if you will, the pharmacy benefit managers, when trying to run a successful business, in such a challenging and complex environment as the U.S. healthcare system. Where I'm from, these local pharmacists, they're fixtures in their communities. They've known their customers most of their lives, and it instills a level of trust in those patients that's rarely seen in today's day and time. I make stops at these local community pharmacies, some to get my own prescriptions filled, some to see how things are going with small business owners, some to see how other things are going in the community. And I never fail to appreciate the unique value that the men and women that work in these local pharmacists add to their customers' lives and to our communities. Unfortunately, on these visits, I'm also troubled because I continue to learn, as I've mentioned before, just how much more difficult it is becoming for those men and women to serve the people who have depended on them for years and to compete with some of the larger entities in the healthcare marketplace. Imagine a situation where your competitor's company gets to come in and audit your books. That's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens when one of the big box retailers who owns a PBM goes in and audits the local community pharmacy. Take, for example, one of the other problems that we have. The increased prevalence of preferred networks and Medicare Part D plans. Currently, many Medicare beneficiaries are effectively told by pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, which pharmacy to use based on exclusionary agreements between those PBMs and, for the most part, big box pharmacies. Most people don't recognize that the big box owns the PBM. Patients pay for this. They pay for this in lower customer service and higher copays. When their pharmacy of choice is excluded from the preferred network, it creates undue stress on the patients and forces them to do business where they may not want to do business. The majority of the time, your local pharmacy is never given the opportunity to participate in the network. Now, that's an unfair business practice. Another issue I often hear about from community pharmacies is the burdensome DIR fees. You know, we as Americans, we pretty much assume that when you go in and you buy something and you leave with what you pay for, that the transaction's over. But with medicine at your local pharmacy, it's a lot different. That transaction is anything but clear and simple for the pharmacist. Pharmacy benefit managers use so-called DIR fees to claw back money from pharmacies on individual claims long after the claim has been resolved. It can be a typographical error, and the pharmacy benefit manager will claw back 100% of what was paid to the pharmacist. That means the pharmacy doesn't know the final reimbursement amount they'll receive for a claim for weeks or even months, and even more so, they're not even reimbursed for the wholesale cost of the drugs that they dispense. In 2004, CMS issued proposed guidance that would provide some relief to our pharmacies struggling with the increased and opaque DIR fees imposed upon them. As I said, anyone who runs a business knows you can't operate when you don't know what your costs are or what your reimbursements are. That's why I've led over 30 of my colleagues and sent in 2 separate letters to the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, urging them to move forward and finalize proposed guidance on this issue. Unfortunately, they're yet to move on that guidance. As I know many of my colleagues, in a bipartisan manner, are going to continue to advocate for CMS to use their authority to ensure a level playing field for all Medicare Part D participants. When competition is stifled and our small businesses suffer, so do the customers of our local community pharmacies. I hope the committees of jurisdiction will consider these bipartisan bills. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for your time. I want to yield back to Mr. Collins any remaining time, and I want to thank him for hosting this special order today.
Thank you, Congressman Scott. And I think this is, you've highlighted a lot of things, and I think it's something that just matters. And sometimes we go through a lot of the big pictures up here and we see a lot of issues, but this is one that matters to hometown. This is Main Street USA. This is something that goes on, and especially for districts like mine and for many others in rural communities, the pharmacy especially your independent community pharmacists, are the lifeblood in these communities. And I've said this before, and I've had this asked of me because we've been doing this a while. Pharmacists, let's make it very clear. Pharmacists I love. I don't care who they work for. Pharmacists are great folks. Whether they work in a big box store, they work for the big major chain, or they're independent, own their own business, pharmacists want to help people. That's why they went into it to start with. So I think what we're fighting here is a system that I've talked to many pharmacy students who are now saying, we're not sure we want to go into this, or we're very concerned about our futures, because they're looking at the abusive policies of PBMs, and they're saying, I don't want to follow in my mom or dad's footsteps. I don't want to follow and open up a store front and hire people because I can't make it this way, and they end up being forced in. I want to talk a little bit. We've been vague about this. I'm not going to be vague here for the next little bit. We're going to talk about PBMs and this regular auditing of community pharmacists to recruit large reimbursements. There's nothing wrong, let me go back over this. There's nothing wrong with audits performed with the intention of uncovering abuse. However, PBM's auditing has another motivation. Pharmacists have told me that the most expensive prescriptions are always the target during the audit. Always. PBMs choose to audit only the most expensive medications, looking for clerical errors like typos, misspelled names, or addresses. Or better yet, as I just heard from a recent one of my pharmacists, in which they dinged one of my pharmacists because the doctor wrote a specific amount for an eye medication. The doctor, let's make this very clear, and I know Representative Carter is probably going to get into this a little bit more, but the doctor himself wrote the prescription. The prescription goes to the pharmacist. The pharmacist filled the prescription as the doctor said. But when the PBM auditor got there, they said, no, you're not supposed to use that amount, use this amount. I want to know what medical school this auditor went to. I want to know when they decided to start practicing medicine without a license. When they can come in and say amounts, I can understand swerving to a generic over a name brand or a name brand over a generic. That's within, sort of what we've become used to. But when they can actually go in and ding one of our pharmacists for amounts that the doctor said, we've got a system that's a little bit abusive. Well, let me rephrase that. It's downright corrupt. They go in and they do audits, they find these clerical errors, and when they do this, they recoup all the funding paid for that prescription. Like I said earlier, they don't take back just the profit, they don't take back the cost, they take back everything. These audits are not intended to end Medicare fraud. The PBMs use them to take taxpayer funds and claim them as profits. If a pharmacist checked the box that said sent by fax instead of sent by email, the PBM is able to reclaim the entire cost of the drug. They don't just take back the copay or the pharmacist's profits. Again, I just want you to understand how crazy this is. But you see, instead of looking and having their time and effort of audits that could be better spent helping local pharmacists do what they do best, they're having to look over this all the time, focusing on improved quality for their patients. The PBMs, frankly, it's shown over the last little bit that they're not interested in the well-being of the patient. They're interested in that other P word, profit, not patient. It's really concerning, and this is what's happened. In the interest of that profit, the PBMs have engaged in anti-competitive business practices. Certain PBMs own or have ownership stakes in the very pharmacists they're negotiating lower drug prices with. When a PBM is owned by the entity it is supposed to be in bargain with, there is inherent conflict of interest. This can lead to fraud, deception, anti-competitive conduct, and higher prices. Here's a great one. I love this. Many large PBMs own their own mail-order pharmacy and financially penalize patients that choose their community pharmacist instead of the PBM-owned one. PBMs try to drive customers from community pharmacists into the mail-order firms, arguing it saves consumers and drug plans money. However, a study by the Taxpayer Protection Alliance highlighted waste, fraud, and abuse within the mail-order system run by the PBMs. The TPA study noticed that 90% of patients were moved to mail order due to encouragement or from a PBM. According to Medicare data, PBM-owned pharmacies may charge as much as 83% more to fill prescriptions than community pharmacists. PBM's practices limit consumer choice, increase drug prices by engaging in vertical integration in their ownership of mail-order pharmacies, killing competition. And here was one that was classic. I walked into one of my smaller towns, had a pharmacist, and the pharmacist said, I got in trouble. I got a letter there. They showed me the letter. They delivered some medicine to some of their customers. They get a letter from the PBM saying, you're not in the mail order business. They said, we're just delivering. And they actually were going to have their contract threatened if they sent these people their drugs. Representative Carter is going to talk a minute, but you've seen this, and I just want to break for just a second, because I want to emphasize something. But just back and forth, that's unbelievable. That they actually will get onto pharmacies and say, you can't reach out, you can't contact your customer to tell them that they can be a part of the plan. One of my pharmacists actually was left off of a plan that they were actually on. The PBM sends a letter to all his customers saying that they're not a part of the plan, when in actuality he was. And then when confronted with it, they refused to send a letter out to the customer saying, we're wrong. I mean, just briefly, is that, am I highlighting something that's uncommon, or is that a common practice?
No, it is. As the gentleman states, it is a very common practice. And, you know, it's downright un-American. I mean, look, small businesses are the backbone of our economy here in America. And when you do not allow a small business to participate, even if they're willing to take the reimbursement that an insurance company is offering, but that insurance company never will not let them participate, that, in my opinion, is un-American.
Well, and you've hit something. You've led into a great example. That's why we do this. Let's just highlight. And if there's problems, let's fix them. But here's the interesting. You hit on that issue, and we've heard of DRR fees tonight. We've heard about reimbursements. Let me give you an example from a little company called Humana. Humana proposed amendments. I had a pharmacist call me about proposed amendments to their pharmacy provider agreement. And Humana decided to withhold $5 per prescription from initial reimbursements to the pharmacy. Now, you understand what's happening. They're withholding $5 of what they should be sending to the pharmacy. They returned the reimbursements was conditional on the pharmacy meeting certain patient adherence metrics. This is essentially a fee conditional on meeting certain performance standards, and Humana would withhold reimbursements from poorly performing pharmacies. That sounds good, doesn't it? Oh, it's got a great twang to it. Somebody in the marketing office there thought this is going to be pretty cool. Sounds so good. But let's talk about it. Humana's criteria, however, had little to do with patient care and more with driving community pharmacists out of the market. Many of the metrics used included patient adherence, or beyond the control of the pharmacist. Humana's amendment unduly burdens small pharmacies and protects large chain pharmacies, many of which they own. Humana enlisted the actuaries to ensure this formula guarantees they will retain 60% of the withheld reimbursement monies, most of it coming from community pharmacists. Pharmacists in the 80th percentile and up in each category would receive $2 per category. If a pharmacist it meets expectations in all three categories, they will earn $6, a $1 profit per prescription. Now, remember, this is what was already withheld from them. Pharmacists below the 80th percentile would receive 7 or 67 cents, and below the 50th percentile would receive none of the reimbursement that they withheld. This is a reimbursement that's supposed to go back to the pharmacies. They're not getting any of it. Many of the community pharmacists often can't afford to lose this additional 33 cents to $5 for every prescription they fill. Only big box pharmacies really have that ability. Humana also favors big box pharmacies by allowing the number of patients to serve as a function of a tiebreaker. This amazed me. For example, a community pharmacy and a big box pharmacist might both have 100% adherence to certain performance measures. However, if the big box pharmacy serves more patients than the community pharmacist, it will achieve a higher percentile score than the community pharmacy. Humana disproportionately favors large chain pharmacies at the small pharmacies' expense. Certain pharmacies have enough patients to minimize the effects of patient non-adherence to their ratings. At independent community pharmacies, one patient's non-adherence could cost pharmacies thousands of dollars by moving a pharmacy from the top bracket to one below. If somebody were listening to us, Representative Carter, they would say, we're making this up. We're not. I've been doing this now for well over a year, almost 2 years now. I've never been challenged on these facts. They don't like it. And they're listening probably right now saying, what can we do to go settle this down? But it's just not right. When they look at these things and they see savings in the TRICARE plan, when they see savings in state government, it is like they're saying, look at the shiny object over here, don't face reality. This one is just amazing to me. When you're taking money that should go back to the pharmacists and putting it on this metric scale that they can't compete on, or you're taking their customers but won't allow the pharmacist to reach out, these are the things that just really, really are amazing to me. I wrote a letter with you urging CMS Act to review this Humana proposed amendments for their Part D pharmacy provider agreement. This is just something that's got to change as we go forward. Well, there's nobody knows that any better than you, Representative Carter, knowing the situations. I've said this all along. I do this because I have been helped so much by community pharmacists and believe when wrong is wrong, you call it, when you can try and make it right. You've lived this and continue, by your service in not only the Georgia legislature, but up here, help us continue to highlight that. I'm going to be on the front lines continuing this fight. You're there working it out as well. And tonight, I think we just need to continue this practice of saying, here's the facts, and encouraging our committees of jurisdiction to take action on this and just evaluate it. Let the bills, MAC Transparency, the clawback bill, these bills have a chance just to be heard, because I've found that every time I share this with members, they can't believe it. They want to know more. And when we show them the facts, they say this needs to be discussed. So we've got some time still planned tonight. I want you to take what's on your heart, share where you're seeing, and as we continue this fight for what is right.
Well, I want to thank the gentleman. I want to thank you for organizing this. I want to thank you for bringing this to light. This is something that I know you're obviously very passionate about, and that you have worked on for a long time, many years. And it's not just you. You're obviously a leader here, but also Representative Scott, who spoke earlier, Representative Losbach. I may be the only pharmacist in Congress, but we have many friends of pharmacy in Congress, and we appreciate this very much. But even more so, if I may, even more so, what you're concerned about, what Representative Scott's concerned about, what Representative Losbach, what everyone up here is concerned about is care.
Exactly.
That's what we're talking about.
You've hit it. And just what you're saying about friends, every time we do this, we gain members who begin to look at the issue. They don't just believe what the PBMs bring to them and say, here, look at it. We're getting to the heart of it. All I'm asking, and for me, and I know for you, is for every member here, go talk to a community pharmacist. All they got to do is go talk to them. We're not sharing anything. It's not real.
And that's the whole key. The whole key is that what we're talking about is patient care. We're not talking about somebody trying to, community pharmacies trying to pad their pockets, but what we're trying to point out, and what you've done so efficiently, particularly with your chart, is to point out what is happening here. Everyone's concerned about high drug prices right now. And it's one of the biggest subjects that we hear about in the newscasts and everywhere. Granted, this is not the only part of that, but it's a big part of it. Because what's happening is we're taking competition out of health care. If we talk about Obamacare, if we talk about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it, my number one concern with it has taken competition, it has taken the free market out of health care. I mean, think about it. Am I talking just about independent retail pharmacies? No. I'm talking about independent health care. How many independent doctors do you know anymore? No. Most of them are members of healthcare systems. Most of them are members of hospital systems, which are fine systems. But again, we're taking away competition, and that's what's happening here. But Representative Collins, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for again, organizing this and bringing this to light. As you have mentioned, I have been a community pharmacist for over 30 years. Graduated from the University of Georgia in 1980. Go Dogs. Well, just as proud as I can be of my alma mater. And pharmacy has changed tremendously since I graduated. I serve on the advisory board at the University of Georgia and the College of Pharmacy, and I can tell you the quality of students that are graduating now from pharmacy school is just tremendous. The clinical expertise that they are graduating with, it makes us all in healthcare very, very proud. And I still maintain that pharmacists are some of the most overtrained and underutilized professionals out there. But again, I want to get back in full disclosure here. Now, I am a free market person. I am someone who believes in the free market. I believe in competition. And that's all community pharmacists are saying. Let us compete. But as Representative Collins has pointed out so succinctly here, we don't even have the opportunity to compete. Folks, when you have the insurance company owning the pharmacy and making decisions that impact patients and where they can go and telling patients, no, you cannot buy your prescription over here, you have to buy it over here. That takes the free market out of the system. That takes competition out of the system. Who cannot see that? There are chains out there who will tell you that their operation is a three-legged stool. That they have the PBMs, they have the pharmacy, and now they have their health clinics. Well, what does that do? You know, I mean, it's a great business model, sure. But once they get you, they got you. Because if you go to a pharmacy and they write that prescription, and then that prescription is filled right there, well, obviously that is a conflict of interest. But that's what's happening now. If the insurance company owns the and tells you you have to go to this pharmacy, that is a problem. True story. True story. Now, my wife, I owned 3 community pharmacies before I became a member of Congress. My wife owns them now. While I still own those pharmacies, I filled a prescription for my wife at the pharmacy that I own. This is about 3 or 4 years ago. Later on that night, she got a call from the insurance company encouraging her to get that prescription filled at another pharmacy. Now, I'm telling you, this is true. I'm honest. That is just crazy.
And yet, if you had done that, they'd have cut your contract off.
Well, exactly.
You know, you
exactly.
can't engage in that kind of practice. It's amazing.
Well, but it begs the question, how did they know about it?
Exactly.
Okay, how did they know about it? Here's how they know about it. Here's what happens. When you bring a prescription into a pharmacy, we fill that prescription and we adjudicate the claim. What that means is the community pharmacy's computer calls the insurance company's computer, and it tells you automatically whether they're going to pay it and how much they're going to pay. Well, guess what? That pharmacy that owns that insurance company that I just called, they have that information. Yeah, there are laws against it. There's supposed to be a wall there in between them. But you tell me how that pharmacy knew that my wife had a prescription filled that day at the community pharmacy that I owned at that time. Obviously, that's what's happening. You know, Representative Collins, you have introduced a bill, a great bill. It has to do with MAC Transparency. MAC, Maximum Allowable Cost. Let me tell you very quickly what Maximum Allowable Cost is. And if we talk about acronyms, well, nobody uses as many acronyms as the federal government uses. And I tell people all the time that one of my goals in Congress is to learn at least 10% of all the acronyms that we use up here. But the acronym MAC, M-A-C, Maximum Allowable Cost, what that is that insurance companies come up with a list and they say, this is what we are going to pay you. This is a maximum we're going to pay you. If you can't buy it any cheaper than that, then I'm sorry, you're just going to lose money. Well, that's okay to a certain extent. We understand that. We can work within that. But what happens is they don't update it. So all of a sudden, and you've seen it, we've all experienced what has happened with the spikes in insurance in drug costs here recently, particularly in generic drugs. What happens is that drug goes up. Well, the insurance company drags their feet and they don't increase that maximum allowable cost, and all of a sudden the pharmacy is dispensing something at a loss. Well, that's obviously a business model that's not going to sustain. You're not going to be able to stay in business if you're dispensing something and losing money on it. And then how do they come up with this MAC list? What we're talking about here and what Representative Collins' bill addresses is what's called MAC Transparency. And you know, all we're asking here is to shine light on this, is to have some transparency so we can see exactly what is going on. And that's what his bill does, and we appreciate his work on that very much. His bill is a step forward, not only for the industry, but, again, for the beneficiary, for the patient. That's ultimately who is going to save money. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do here. You know, it's no surprise that costs are going up because of a lack of transparency in the system. No surprise at all. We've got to have more transparency, particularly in the pricing of generics, if we're going to be able to create a stable and an affordable health care system. Now, you heard mentioned here earlier DIR fees. DIR, direct and indirect remuneration. And you heard mentioned clawbacks. Now, let me try to articulate this the best I can. And what happens here is these DIR fees, which is something that's come up in the past probably year, maybe year and a half or 2 years. But what this is I mentioned earlier that when the community pharmacy fills the prescription, that we adjudicate the claim, that our computer calls their computer and the insurance computer and it tells us how much they're going to pay. Okay, we're okay with that. We understand what we're going to get paid. But yet with DIR fees, months later, the insurance company comes back and says, oh, we told you we were going to pay you $2.50. No, we got to take back that $2.50. We're not going to be able to pay you that. Folks, obviously that's not a sustainable business model. Nobody can stay in business that way. Yet that's the way DIR fees are being imposed now. Thank goodness, just last week, Congressman Morgan Griffith from Virginia, our colleague, introduced a bill that addresses Medicare Part D, prescription drug transparency, and DIR fees. Thank you, Congressman Griffith, for that. Again, keep in mind, folks, we're not talking, we got to make community pharmacies profitable. All community pharmacies want to do is to compete. We just want to have the opportunity to compete on a fair, level playing field. That's all we're asking. We're not asking for any favoritism at all. Yet when you've got an insurance company that owns the pharmacy, that is obviously a conflict of interest. Who cannot see that? Again, Congressman Griffith has introduced this bill, and it's a great bill. These DIR fees, big unknown for pharmacists, as I mentioned, they can sometimes total up to thousands of dollars per month, and they can significantly complicate what your net reimbursement is going to be to cover your cost. In fact, in a recent survey, nearly 67%, almost two-thirds of community pharmacists have indicated they don't receive any information about when those fees will be collected or how large they will be. Two-thirds of the pharmacies here. And folks, I was so happy to see Representative Lowe's back. He pointed out that he was the only Democrat here tonight, but I can assure you that there are other Democrats, because this is a bipartisan issue. Listen, when you go to get a prescription filled in a community pharmacy, they don't ask if you're a Republican or a Democrat. They could care less. All they know is you're a patient. And we need to take care of that patient. And that's what we're trying to do. There is another bill that I want to touch on here. It's a very important bill. And it is one that has been introduced by another good friend of pharmacy, Representative Brett Guthrie from Kentucky. And it's called the Pharmacy and Medically Underserved Areas Enhancement Act. And this the Pharmacy Provider Act. You know, as I mentioned earlier, the pharmacists who are graduating today are so clinically superior to when I graduated. And Congressman Scott, I believe, mentioned earlier about, you know, the things that pharmacists are doing now: flu shots, immunizations, all of those things that pharmacists are able to do. You know, pharmacists are the most accessible healthcare professionals out there. We in America, if we are ever going to get our healthcare costs under control, we have to take advantage of that. We have to take advantage of having that expertise right there before us and having it so accessible. Representative Guthrie's bill, the Pharmacy Provider Status bill, will give us the opportunity to reimburse pharmacists for those clinical services that they are capable and that they are currently providing. This is something that needs to be done under Medicare Part B. I mentioned Congressman Griffith and what he's done, and it really has been a blessing. Then Congressman Brett Guthrie and what he's done, and Congressman Collins and what he's done. All of these things are very, very important. Before I yield back to Representative Collins, I want to mention one other thing, and that is something that's come out of the Energy and Commerce Committee this year, and that is the 21st Century Cures. You know, 21st Century Cures is a great piece of legislation. That and the opioid bill that we passed earlier this year, I think, are two of the bills that I'm most proud of since I've been a member of this body. And part of that has to do with the fact that, you know, they're health care, and I'm a healthcare professional. But 21st Century Cures is a great piece of legislation. It's been passed under the leadership of, as I say, of Chairman Fred Upton and the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's been critical in advancing research. It addresses so many different things. It increases funding for the National Institutes of Health. It streamlines the process of the FDA and how they approve medications. It offers incentives to companies to come up with new innovations, with new medications. Right now we know of over 10,000 diseases that affect humankind, yet only 500 of them can be treated. 21st Century Cures addresses this. It's a great piece of legislation, and I would be remiss if I did not mention that. Again, I want to thank Congressman Collins, and I want to thank all my colleagues who have spoken here tonight on a very, very important subject. Again, folks, all we're saying is let us compete. I have had so many patients who have been, their parents, their grandparents, traded at our pharmacy. Yet, because their insurance plan changed, they literally left our pharmacy in tears and had to go down the street and have a prescription filled somewhere else. That is not American. It is not right. Again, I want to thank you, Congressman Collins, for this opportunity given me to speak on this. Obviously, something that I've dealt with all my life, my professional life. I'm very proud of our profession. I'm very proud of community pharmacy. I'm very proud of the patient care that the community pharmacists and all pharmacists provide to the patients. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, I want to thank you for being a part, and you provide an insight that is, as I've said, for those of us who see this and call unfair, and we're learning about it every day, you've lived it, and I think providing those insights are valuable. And the more we continue down this path, I mean, does it just, and I spoke about it in I'm on Rules Committee as well. I talked about it in Rules Committee, and he was amazed when I heard the other members who were sitting there. Some were on Energy and Commerce, some were on others, and they finally said, that deserves a hearing. MAC Transparency deserves a hearing. Morgan's Griffith's bill deserves a hearing. Guthrie's bill deserves a hearing. These are things that actually save money, except for the coercive twist-arm tactics of PBMs who just think that 83% of the market is not enough. 83% roughly of the market is not enough. That they get on people about mail order. They want you to turn. They do it, and your insight onto how they actually know that wall. Yeah, that wall. That's the flimsiest wall I've ever seen. Maybe they'll start building it better. I don't know. In North Georgia, we build them a little harder than that.
Absolutely.
As we go. But I appreciate everything. I want to go into something tonight, and it's something that we've talked about, is just explain how this works. Because, maybe some aren't as familiar, they hadn't studied this and had a great staff. I've actually had a great staff that have put together. Got, Bob's here tonight. I got Sally Rose. I have a staff member who's still with me in spirit, but she's not with us. Jennifer has been working on this for a long time. But also had Daniel Ashworth. Daniel was an intern, a pharmacist intern, who helped us out a lot and helped prepare this. And I wanted to show you, I showed you this at the beginning. And it's sort of the PBMs are at the middle of the world here, if you would. So let's just talk about this. Let's just start off with where it should start. And the patient, makes medication decision, or they gets it from the doctor, and they're typically, okay, if you go this way, they're employers. A lot of times the employee, their health benefit plan, that's where they get that. And so as we start here with the employers turn to PBMs or their insurance companies for plan decisions. So this is they turn to them and say, here's how the plan's going to work, here the plan operates. They expect the PBM to look after their best interest and to help save them money. That was the whole setup in the beginning. Until they began to vertically integrate, to take on and become the main player in the market. So what happens here is they make the plan decisions to entrust the PBMs to do that, and the PBMs in turn are supposed to give back the savings in this. We've already seen tonight how TRICARE has already said $1.3 billion. This was their own internal study. We've also seen others where the fraud and abuse are not finding these savings. So again, let's just continue on. Pharmaceutical companies have an interesting relationship as well, because they're through rebates that they give to the PBMs, or to incentivize, if you would, the use of drugs, their brand names, their ones under patent, which is very valuable. You're not going to find a stronger proponent of patent and copyright content in this Congress than me. And what they're doing here is they're saying, okay, we're going to give rebates back so you can purchase, and we're going to have brand preference so that you'll encourage this brand over this generic, or frankly this generic over this brand. And that's okay, we understand that. But this rebate is supposed to actually go into the savings part. But there's no transparency here. We don't know where it's going. And you're not getting the savings back over here where the rebates could. And then we get to really the one that's interesting. The pharmaceutical companies to the pharmacy, and then back to patient care. This is where it gets interesting with the PBMs and their interesting relationships with the independent community. Predatory pricing, such as we're addressing in the MAC Transparency list, where the numbers change. They're not sure. We get into the DIR fees. We get into all this stuff that has now become, instead of for the PBM, the P in patient, the P actually should be, and I'm not going to write on this beautiful chart, but I might as well just put profit. Because as I've already discussed earlier tonight, the audits aren't about patient safety. As Representative Carter said, this is not about giving independent pharmacies or community pharmacists a leg up. They don't want to be guaranteed a profit. They just want to be guaranteed to be able to open their doors and not be intimidated, coerced, or backed down by threats from PBMs that are much larger, that basically say, we'll put you out of business, Madam Speaker. That's what they do. They're supposed to have random audits. I had one of my pharmacists say, they started laughing when we talked about random audits. They had the same audit about a year earlier. In other words, they're on a cycle. They just come back around the same time. These aren't random. They're not there for safety. They're there for profit. It's frustrating. I've never seen anything else like this. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen, in which a business model that we've actually condoned, especially with the taxpayer money side, says that you can extort from pharmacies whatever you want. We'll take back fees. We'll put you on a metrics like Humana did. We'll put you on a metrics that it will give you the possibility of making more, but then inherently rig it against the small pharmacies. That's a problem. They can't answer the question. If they had, they would have said it a long time ago. They just hope I go away. And quit talking about this. But there's members every time we talk. Some couldn't come tonight. And every time we come down here and we shine light on this very dark subject, more members come along and say, that don't sound right. I know you've had those conversations, Representative Carter. I've had those conversations. There are members, all over this room that have had to experience this in their own lives. So I come to you tonight, just saying, look, and as we put this here, and we look at the interaction, I'm just going to say, this is the most important part right here. It's about the patient. It's about the patient. If we want to fix this, then let's look at how our money's spent. If we want to fix this, let's look at being able to come back weeks, months later and draw back a day IR fee. Let's talk about what the problems are here. But never forget the patient. Shouldn't be hard for them. Pharmacy benefit manager, the first letter is P. Let's just change it from profit to patient. Let's change it from being a facilitator to help pharmacies and help employers to market drugs to help the patient. When studies after studies show that it doesn't work. And Madam Speaker, we could talk for hours, but this is something we're going to continue to fight on. I appreciate the time we've had tonight, and this is not the end of this fight. And with that, I yield back.